Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old Fourth Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Well, Donald Trump couldn't even define valor to begin with. So the fact that he is suggesting that Governor Walz has stolen valor in some way, shape, or form is incredibly offensive to me. Trump wouldn't even understand the concept of valor.
You're listening to the voice of Representative Mikey Sherrill from New Jersey. She is in Congress. And on with Ben Masalis from the Midas Touch, doing an interview where they discussed at great length the latest swift boating attempt from the right wing, this time on vice presidential candidate Governor Tim Walz from Minnesota. I'm going to let her continue, and then we'll dive on into the conversation on The Ron Show today. Thank you for listening on the America One Radio app or at progressivevoices.com or wherever you podcast.
So here we have a person who served for 24 years in the National Guard, something I'm sure Trump doesn't appreciate because he thinks anyone who serves is a sucker or a loser. But here is somebody who I believe served our nation in the National Guard, and I think that is an honorable thing to do, and I very much appreciate his service. I even appreciate the service of J.D. Vance because I think it's honorable to serve your country, and I think it's dishonorable to go after veterans on that service, especially with untruths. So what we know is that we have Walz, who served his country for 24 years. Might I just remind people that a general retirement out of our United States military is at 20 years. So he surpassed even that, served for 24 years, and then decided to continue his service in Congress to really address some of the things he cared about for veterans and did, in fact, work on the veteran affairs community. So he serves for 24 years, decides to get out to run for Congress where he thinks he can continue his service to his country and to the people in his community. And yet now is being told that because he got out of the military, before, quite frankly, his unit was even told that they might be deploying to Iraq, because he got out of the military at that time and his unit later deployed to Iraq, that somehow he has shirked his duty. I am shocked that they are throwing around this accusation. And quite frankly, it's, as I've said before, it's the same old bullshit they did with the swift boats, which many of us of a certain generation, veterans of a certain generation, remember the details of that. It is actually the same guy working on this campaign who did the swift boat attacks, who is now doing it again because they're one-trick ponies in the Republican Party. They don't have any policy. They don't have any vision of the future. They simply want to divide us. They want to put out misinformation on the things that we care most deeply about, and in this case, our veterans. If it doesn't come across, then let me just state it clearly. I'm incredibly offended by this as a veteran, and most of my veteran colleagues are as well.
So let me provide a little background, first of all. I grew up just outside a military base in metropolitan Augusta, Georgia. Fort Gordon. Well, it's now Fort Eisenhower. I forgot we've changed. It takes some time. Actually, as a child, we had to deal with the renaming of a lake, Clark's Hill, to Lake Thurmond, after Strom Thurmond, of all people. And then it became one of those, well, on the South Carolina side, you can call it what you want. It's always going to be Clark's Hill to me. Anyway, so yeah, I have to get used to that. Fort Eisenhower now. Anyway, growing up outside of the former Fort Gordon, some of my school kid friends had parents who were in the military. We had some, in fact, I think we even had a teacher in middle school who was in the National Guard who never deployed, but served in the military for decades. Many of them serving for decades in peacetime between Vietnam and the first Iraq War, having never been deployed. The reason I point this out is because I can't help but think of, faces just keep popping through my head of folks that I've known over the years who served in the military and never deployed, who may have gotten out just before the first Iraq War or maybe just before 9/11 even, having never gone overseas to a theater of war. I can't help but think about folks like that when I see this swift boating of Governor Tim Walz. and wondering, how offended are these folks? I think about my friend Daryl, who I met actually when he was stationed at the then named Fort Gordon. He and I are like best friends. I keep meaning to check in on him to see, get his thoughts on this. And, he got to serve domestically. I think about my Marine friend, Michael, who I've known, more than 20 years now, almost his entire Navy career. Now, he has actually deployed. He's been in the heat of battle. He's been in Iraq. But this simple logic that if you're in the military during a time of war and you didn't go over there, you're somehow a lesser. To me, that this is all like very insulting, especially coming from the 2024 Trump campaign. In fact, let's go back about 5 years or so. We have this from the Ring of Fire podcast.
According to a new report in the New York Times, Donald Trump was actually given a diagnosis of bone spurs to get himself out of the Vietnam War by a doctor who wanted nothing more than to get favor with Trump's father, Fred.
That is the voice of Farron Cousins, the host of the Ring of Fire podcast.
That is actually the conclusion not of reporters trying to make Donald Trump look bad, but of the two daughters of the doctor who actually gave Donald Trump that diagnosis. The doctor was Dr. Larry Bronstein, who passed away in 2007. He was a podiatrist. He ran his office out of a building actually owned by Trump's father, Fred Trump. So when Fred brought in little Donnie, trying to come up with a way to get him out of Vietnam, the podiatrist, according to his own daughters, came up with the made-up diagnosis of bone spurs. Why? Well, it's actually pretty simple. Donald Trump had obviously gone through regular health physicals prior to going to the podiatrist, and everything checked out fine. He was not able to get an actual exemption based on his normal health.
Let's also remember, by the way, Donald Trump brags all the time about his athletic prowess back in his younger days. So which is it?
So you go to a guy who specializes in this kind of thing. He knows what he can say that other doctors can't necessarily refute and the government can't argue with, and that was something as simple as bone spurs. Because bone spurs typically do not present with any symptoms at all. Most people have bone spurs and may not even know it. Others may occasionally feel foot pain. They take ibuprofen, Tylenol, whatever it is, and they're fine. They move on with their day. They don't know it's an actual problem. And so that's why the doctor picked that. Because it's not something that would be debilitating enough to where somebody could look at him and say, oh, you clearly don't have this. You look perfectly fine. You're walking normal. Get on the bus. You're going to Vietnam. And that's why he did it. And the two daughters who survived the doctor told the New York Times that their father would speak of this frequently, about how he, gave this diagnosis in order to get favor with Fred Trump. And the favor that he got in return was that anytime there was a problem with this building where the doctor was running his office, he'd call Fred, and Fred would send people down immediately to fix it. That was the little quid pro quo there.
I mean, that's kind of what landlords are supposed to do anyway without doing personal favors for your kid, but okay.
I'll get your son out of Vietnam, and then anytime there's a problem with this building, I'm going to be first on your list, and you're going to send somebody down here to fix it immediately. Worked out pretty well for both of them. But here's the thing. Trump had claimed during the campaign back in 2016 that he couldn't remember who the doctor was. It was so long ago, he didn't know the doctor that gave him the diagnosis, but he had plenty of documentation to back it up. And he never provided the documentation. Nope. And at this point, most medical documentation regarding exemptions from Vietnam, according to the National Archives, has already been destroyed.
Right.
So there is no way to actually go back through and see what Donald Trump's actual diagnosis was or the reasoning behind it. If Trump's not going to release it, the daughters say they no longer have it either. It was all sold when their father sold the podiatry office. So there's not any record, really. We don't know for certain that these two women are telling the truth, but their story certainly does seem to add up with Donald Trump.
Unless, of course, they're nasty women, always saying nasty things about Donald Trump, because people who say unkind things about Donald Trump are just vile, nasty women, right?
And all of it paints a picture of a man who is too cowardly, too afraid, and whose own father used his power in the city of New York to get his son out of conflict.
Again, that is Ring of Fire podcast host Farron Cousins back in 2018. Again, I can't make any sense of why this is a line of attack from the Trump-Vance campaign. J.D. Vance, by the way, and you heard Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill earlier speak of J.D. Vance and his military career. She didn't cast any aspersions about his military career. J.D. Vance was a Marine correspondent who was never in combat, but was in combat zones. And no one's going to nitpick about that, because when you're deployed overseas in a theater of war, innocent people are harmed or killed all the time. Those who are not actually combatants are harmed or killed all the time. There's all sorts of support mechanisms within our branches of the U.S. military. And no one's going to quibble and say, you were just a cook, a bottle washer. You were in a theater of war. You were in an area fraught with danger. You are to be commended for that. Tim Walz didn't get deployed by his unit because he filed his papers after 24 years. And by the way, I believe 3 or 4 of those during the post 9/11 Iraq War, when his unit could have been deployed. He stayed and he helped groom young men and women to serve in a war, by the way, that he ideologically was opposed to, as, by the way, is, in hindsight at least, J.D. Vance. And as you heard Congresswoman Sherrill point out, because he had planned to run, in fact, had already launched his run for Congress prior to deployment, he chose to stick to his plan to do so, to take his experience not only from his National Guard service, but, oh, by the way, he was also a school teacher, a social studies school teacher. That, too, I'm sure had to weigh on his mind. Having children, I believe a young son who is developmentally challenged, and made a decision that I'm sure was very tough for him to make, but did nonetheless, and parlayed all of his experiences in the classroom, the football field, in the National Guard, into his congressional service, where he served on veterans committees, subcommittees, and did the work to help bring needed resources to the returning veterans coming back from the war he was ideologically opposed to. I have to say, I didn't really want to spend a whole lot of time on this topic, just simply because I believe that those who are moved by this kind of political attack, we're never going to vote for Kamala Harris or Tim Walz anyway. So let them do what they're going to do with it. And when they howl and whine that the media is not covering this story, it's because it's a non-story. Back after this, The Ron Show on America One Radio and Progressive Voices via TuneIn. You can follow The Ron Show on your preferred social media platforms at Ron Show ATL, Facebook, Twitter, X, Instagram, Threads. Syndicated radio host Eric Erickson, based in Macon, Georgia, where I believe he lives. His flagship station is here in Atlanta, WSB. He held his annual The Gathering, where he has conservatives sit down on a stage and Q&A and sells tickets. And he had a Georgia Insurance Commissioner John King on. John King, born in Mexico, served in the military and for various police departments over the years before becoming involved in politics, and now the state's insurance commissioner, spoke of Tim Walz and invoked the stolen valor quip.
Being a member of the military doesn't give you any magical powers to cloak yourself around the American flag. It just means that I serve. I felt the calling, and I serve with my. My other duty as a leader is to make sure that I did everything I could to keep my soldiers healthy and alive.
Okay, that's all sounding pretty good so far. And then
he hurt his unit when he bailed out on his unit. Somebody else had to take his spot. Somebody that was not planning on deploying. They had less time to prepare his unit for combat. And I think that's a disservice.
According to PBS and through PolitiFact, after 24 years of military service, Walls said he retired from the Minnesota National Guard in May 2005 to run for Congress. He had actually submitted retirement paperwork 5 to 7 months beforehand, and he filed candidacy paperwork 3 months before May 2005. While serving in Congress, he gave an interview in 2009 with the Library of Congress where his military background came up and his deciding to run for Congress.
And so you left the service or the Guard at what point?
Yeah, I left in April of 2005, and this was what, for me it was just short of 25 years, and it was to run for this office. We were really concerned that we were going to try and do both. There's always the Hatch Act and some of the things that you have to be very careful of.
The Hatch Act passed in 1939, which of course prevents pernicious political activity while in an official government or military role in his case.
I think most people probably in my unit, and I know as teachers, really didn't know my politics because it wasn't the place to be that way. But I became, I think after I came back in 2004, much more engaged, making sure that, that there was a kind of a civilian voice to things that I felt. I was never engaged in politics, didn't know my county unit chair, never ran for elected office, none of that. But I felt very much that there needed to be a voice there, whether it was for those, those soldiers and their families, which is something I obviously, sitting on the VA committee, take very seriously. But I decided to retire and focus full time on running for this office, and then in, of course, November 2006 won.
A little further into that interview,
talk about your development of the motivation to run for Congress, sort of the steps you went through.
Yeah, I think being a high school teacher, and again focusing heavily on cultural studies and being in the military and watching this, I felt, and I think probably the driving factor was on this of especially over the time we were gone, missing that most of the 2004 election cycle, but watching there was at that time this idea that, well, don't criticize any of the civilian leadership on this, that if you do that you're weakening the military, you're not putting them. And I remember being it's not the place when you're in to speak on this, but feeling very strongly, and always had felt on this, that one of the strengths of this country was that we had strong civilian leadership, we had input back and forth between the military, but the military understood where things came from. And I felt at that point that there wasn't a voice being expressed for that, not in terms of should we use or should we not use the military. Those are the hardest questions that get made here, but the idea that that we should never question it once it's done. And I felt like it was not the right thing to do to put these folks downrange without giving them a clear-cut mission. I've been and very publicly so, critical of the conduct in Afghanistan that didn't make more progress up until this point. So I think some of those things started to drive me in that direction. And I have to be very honest with you, the level of discourse had eroded, where I saw this as, I had never been involved, whether it was a teacher, in the military, a coach, in something that wasn't a team effort for the common good. I didn't always get my way. I worked as part of a team and my way wasn't accepted, and I said that's fine, but the ultimate goal was there. And I started seeing us fracture politically to the point where it was us versus them, instead of it's us with different ideas. So I really felt like that I had the ability through especially military experience of being someone looking for problem, to identify where the problem was, identifying a solution, and then gathering all of the different inputs on how to make that work and then going forward. And I thought that was something that was lacking here.
4 days ago on CNN, retired Staff Sergeant Ryan Marty from Wall's unit was asked what the sentiment was within the unit about Wall's deciding to run for Congress.
I don't think he tried to avoid the deployment at all. In fact, I'm really glad he went to Congress and did what he did. If you want to give someone grief for taking a promotion or moving on, I think that's wrong. I think him going to Congress is like taking a promotion. He did a lot of good things as my first sergeant and then sergeant major, but he did even more better things for us as a congressman, then governor, and hopefully going forward as a vice president.
Feels like a non-issue to me. Back after this, The Ron Show on America One Radio and at Progressive Voices via TuneIn.
This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
Man, did the folks in Paris put on a hell of a show or what? I mean, yes, we Americans made a mockery of ourselves. Not me, not our side. Anyway, griping about the opening ceremonies, drag show Last Supper, that wasn't. And then there was the outrage over the Algerian female boxer who defeated the Italian female boxer. The Italian female boxer shocked by the punch she got. Here's my thing. We're sitting here quibbling about gender identity. By the way, the Algerian boxer, definitely a female. Born a female. Just because she has this genetic chromosomal quirk, she's a female. Really sort of points out those on the right who didn't pay a whole lot of attention in science classes once the grades had ones in front of them, like grades 10, 11, and 12. You can tell who didn't pay attention. And can I be honest with you? My biology teacher, Pam Kitchens, who I'm giving a shout out to from Harlem High School, she and I are not ideologically aligned politically, I've learned since we've connected on Facebook, which kind of shocks me. Anyway, she was a really good teacher. I thoroughly had to earn my B plus grade in her class to get through it. I learned a lot because I had to learn. I was one of those kids that, wasn't the studious type because things came kind of naturally to me. I could kind of skate by knowing what I know and, oh, well, that makes sense. Yeah, I got that. But I had to learn in her class. Anyway, you can always point out those who didn't pay much attention to these classes when they make these goofy arguments. It's a slippery slope in the Olympics when you're going to start worrying about, well, okay, so she is a female, but she also had this little genetic quirk. Well, guess what? Every athlete has they're genetic freaks. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm just saying people who can run as fast as Noah Lyles does, there's an advantage. And I'm not saying that like his training and hard work didn't give him that advantage, but there's still an advantage. A person who can lift weights the way they do above hundreds of pounds, there's something genetically different about them. There always is going to be something. There's going to be something genetically different about. Okay, how about the poor guy who pole vaulted and his appendage, his thing, his penis, didn't help him in that case. That's a genetic difference. Didn't work out for him in such a. But when you're able to leap as tall or as far or run as fast or as long, there are genetic different. Anyway, I totally got off on a tangent there that I did not intend to go off on. I meant to say the Paris 24 Games hosts, the city of Paris, the nation of France, did a fantastic job, put on a hell of a show, and even had to deal with the rainy conditions of the opening ceremonies and didn't let that slow the party down. Parisians showed off their city in such a beautiful way, that it made me start thinking, what if Atlanta were to belly up again to that trough? Atlanta famously hosted the games in 1996. And by many accounts, it went pretty well. It's hard to think, it's kind of baffling to think about Atlanta in 1996 versus where we are now. And Atlanta's such a different city now than it was in 1996. To think back to what Atlanta was then and go, wow, we hosted an Olympics? It was, I think hindsight's 2020, and we were kind of miffed when Juan Antonio Samaranch didn't give us the golden kiss off at the closing ceremonies. In he always used to say best Olympic Games ever, and we didn't get that. And I think he stopped doing that after then. We did not get that because it wasn't the most amazing. It was good. We did good. The Olympic Park bombing obviously marred that. Transportation issues marred that. Venue issues marred that. The fact that it was hotter than three hells sort of marred that. And there were, if memory serves, some quibbling about meteorological data. Did we fudge the number? I don't know. Anyway, thinking back to 1996 Atlanta versus now Atlanta, and would Atlanta be in a better position to host the Olympic Games if they were to take another swing at it? Invariably, yes. I think the answer is yes. Atlanta would be in a better position. Does it make Atlanta an Olympic city? That's another question. A friend of the show, King Williams, at I am King Williams on Twitter X, opined 2 days ago. Atlanta should host a future Olympic Games. The city would be in much better infrastructure, amenities, and venue situation than it was in 1996. Better, yes. I don't disagree with that. And I've had some thoughts about Atlanta taking another swing at this, but I don't know that we are in an optimal situation for hosting the Olympic Games. I think most of the venues, yeah, fine. We can check off most of the venues, and those that we don't still have from 1996 or haven't built better since 1996, we could go back and do this again. I don't know so much about the infrastructure part. I was watching NBC News last night when they reported that the Olympic flag had made it to LA. LA, by the way, dealing with a minor earthquake yesterday, and hopefully everybody came through that okay. But also that the mayor of LA saying this is going to be a car-free Olympics in 2028, and that made me sit up. I don't think Atlanta could do anything car-free. 2024 or 2028, we would not be. 2036, I don't know when we would go for this again, but take a listen to the story here.
The Olympic flag is now in the U.S. Mayor Karen Bass flying with the flag from Paris to L.A.
We have the flag now. It's on us. We got a lot of work to do, Los Angeles.
The City of Angels will once again take center stage as the host city of the 2028 Olympics. It's been 40 years since L.A. last hosted the Games. When Olympian Carl Lewis took home 4 gold medals right here at the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum. The biggest track and field stars from around the world will once again get the chance to compete in this storied venue.
That was a life-changing thing. You'll never be this big again in your whole life.
Over 100 years old. Casey Wasserman is the chairman of the LA 28 committee. He says turning the Coliseum, a venue from the 1932 and 1984 games, from a football field back into a track and field venue is the most expensive investment of the games.
To put a track back in means we have to spend about $150 million, and the track will go 14 rows into the stands. That's how big the competition field is. Because we have to put that in, we'll actually have the warm-up track underneath the track.
There will be no new venues built, a unique distinction. More than 80 existing venues across Southern California will hold Olympic events.
Welcome to Intuit Dome. It's LA's newest sports facility. It's also the new home to the Los Angeles Clippers, and 4 years from now, it'll be home to Olympic basketball and some of the greatest fans in the world.
Having the Olympics in the second largest city in the U.S. comes with its share of challenges, including the city's legendary traffic.
The games are going to be car-free, which means if you want to go to any of the venues, you're going to have to take public transportation.
That is a novel concept, and I'm not sure that is 100% verified. There have to be some venues where there are going to be some sports to be held. And by the way, breaking or breakdancing will not be an Olympic sport in 2028. Why Paris did it, but L.A. with its rich hip-hop culture wouldn't is sort of questionable. Although I got to be honest, I watched it. It didn't pass the eyeball test for me either. And it's like ballroom dancing. Is that an Olympic sport? I don't think so. Yeah. I don't say no. I'm okay with that. But we couldn't do that in Atlanta. There's no way we could do that in Atlanta. And also, our track and field venue is now it's been Frankenstein twice. We took the Olympic Stadium and Frankensteined it to be the home of the Atlanta Braves for a while, for about 20 years before they took off for the Battery, and then Frankensteined it again to where it now hosts college football with stands in the middle. It's just not. You can't go back and honestly, that is one of the hallmarks of the Atlanta Olympic Games that to me is kind of a scar. We built this huge track and field opening ceremony stadium and then, chopped it up for baseball. It really was never a very good baseball stadium. It was okay. It was much better than what we had. But obviously what we have at the Battery now is vastly superior to what Turner Field was in its post-Olympic incarnation. And even now, for what Georgia State uses it for, it's okay. It's okay. It's not even as good for Georgia State football as it was for the Braves when it came to baseball, but it's okay. Georgia State needs something vastly smaller, drawn down, more intimate, more football-centric. But I digress. The opening ceremonies, if Atlanta were to ever host the games, would probably be in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. We couldn't do the River Seine thing, right? I mean, we certainly couldn't do that in the Chattahoochee. What would we do for opening ceremonies? Close off the downtown connector and line up hundreds of thousands along the connect? I mean, that would be such an Atlanta thing, right? But no, I don't think we could do the public transportation thing. That would be a nightmare. We would be doing what we did in 1996, using a lot of buses to get folks around, and there were snarls then too. And of course, we couldn't just shut down the city of Atlanta for 2 weeks with folks not working. I love King Williams. I love his optimism. I love this city. I think it's in a better position to host an Olympic Games than it was in 1996. I just don't think it would. I don't think it would measure up, honestly, to what Paris pulled off. And if Mayor Karen Bass is correct, and LA is able to do this without cars, I don't see Atlanta being able to match that either. And I love this city. We are an international city. We are an international sports city. We have world-class soccer events here. We'll have the World Cup in 2026. I think that is going to test us as a city and a metropolitan area and our public transportation needs. But honestly, because Mercedes-Benz Stadium is right there next to a MARTA station below State Farm Arena, I think in that realm, those two venues are fantastically suited for us to host large-scale international sporting events. The rest of the Metro Atlanta, you would imagine that the Battery would be used, Truist Park would be used. I would imagine the Georgia State University Convocation Center near downtown would be used. There's no public transportation at or near it, within walking distance for sure. And remember, this would be the Summer Olympics, so a lot of walking and standing in line in the heat on concrete. It's not, and maybe what's left of Turner Field, or what is it called now? iPark, whatever Georgia State's football stadium is called now. Maybe it too would be used. I would. Here's my hope for if Atlanta, if there's another Billy Payne who wants to step up and try and put together another Atlanta Olympic bid. And again, I don't think there's an appetite for a Summer Olympics in Atlanta, internationally or even nationally. I think there are other cities that may want to take a swing at it that warrants an opportunity themselves. But I think if Atlanta is going to make a swing for another Olympic Games, okay, fine. Would that be the vehicle we would use for funding to prepare for those games? Knowing that we too, like LA, have most of the venues already in place and wouldn't have to spend a whole lot of money on venues, would we instead use that preparational funding to bolster our public transportation so that after the games or during the games, those who come to visit are able to jettison themselves around Metro Atlanta easily from venue to venue or hotel to venue. And then after the games, let that be the legacy that a future Atlanta Olympic Games leaves behind in perpetuity for a city desperately in need for more public transportation. I can't expect that it would goad the state to finally have the Department of Transportation spending money on mass transit in and around Metro Atlanta. But a guy can dream. A guy can dream, right? Maybe this would be the sort of vehicle that an advantageous political figure running for, say, I don't know, governor of the state could use to put wind in the sails of their campaign and a vision for a greater, stronger, more nimble and agile, greater in reach state of Georgia and Metro Atlanta, the economic engine of the state. I mean, I could see it. I just don't know. And this isn't me like poo-pooing the idea. And King, I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm being negative about this. I'm not. I'd love to see Atlanta take another swing at this, but I also don't know, again, that there's an appetite for that in the international sporting community. There was a little bit of a sense after the Atlanta 1996 Olympic Games. Wow. So there was a lot of sprawl. Things were very spread out. I mean, we had events in, was it Macon and Columbus? And did we have to go to Chattanooga for something? I'm trying to remember, like whitewater rafting or something like that. And does that even need to be an Olympic sport? And also, holy crap, it was incredibly hot in Atlanta. Do y'all remember? It was so hot. Like, nobody wants to come back to that. Paris was a little bit cooler than Atlanta the last 2 weeks, in case you didn't notice. I just don't know that. I don't know that there's an appetite for a return to Atlanta. But if there is, I say, my gosh, let's use that as a vehicle for getting the public mass transit that this metro area and this part of the state desperately need. Back after this, The Ron Show on America One Radio and Progressive Voices via TuneIn. All right, final few minutes of today's Ron Show. Thank you for listening. I appreciate that. There used to be a column in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution called The Daily Jolt. It's now just part of their politically Georgia umbrella marketing arm thing or whatever. They do a podcast that they actually it's a radio show that airs on WABE, one of the local NPR stations here, and then they podcast it. So it's all part of that. Anyway, the Politically Georgia column today, written in part by Greg Bluestein, Tia Mitchell, Patricia Murphy, and Adam Van Brimmer, led with this story. Georgia Democrats are turning up the heat on Governor Brian Kemp's decision to opt out of a federal government program that helps lower-income families with school-age children pay for groceries. Georgia is one of roughly a dozen states that didn't join the Summer Electronic Benefits Transfer Program, which is designed to help struggling families during months when their children would otherwise get free or reduced-price lunches at schools. Representative Lucy McBath, of course, of Marietta, and Senator John Ossoff are among the Democrats who have pressed Kemp to commit to the grocery program for next summer ahead of Thursday's deadline. It can be tough in the summertime when school's out and suddenly there aren't school meals anymore, Ossoff told reporters Monday after addressing the Cobb Chamber of Commerce. I'd urge that the governor accept these federal resources to help families across Georgia afford food in the summertime. WANF TV here in Atlanta filed this story yesterday.
Parents and some state leaders are asking the governor to approve federal funding for summer meals. Georgia is one of 13 states that opted out this year, but there is still a chance for next summer. Atlanta News First reporter Abby Kasouris explains.
The deadline to enroll in next year's summer meal program is this Thursday. Nearly $140 million set aside for Georgia students on summer break. Right now, parents and Democrats are trying to get Georgia Governor Brian Kemp to change his mind.
Okay, I need you to be quiet for me, please.
Tasha Miller is a parent to 3 kids. Her school-age daughter is one of 1.2 million Georgia students to receive free school breakfast and lunch. Without those meals during the summertime, she says she's been asking for help.
We're utilizing a food pantry right now, and we are able to go once a week. I know a lot of food pantries don't have that option.
Sunbucks is a federal program offering students who already qualify for free or reduced lunch during the school year $120 per summer. Miller says it means she could afford to buy more meat and produce for her family. She signed a petition with more than 3,000 other parents calling on governors in holdout states to approve the funding. Democrat leaders writing to Georgia Governor Brian Kemp to urge him to do the same.
These federal resources to help families feed their kids are available for the state of Georgia. And what I'd urge is that the governor accept these federal resources to help families across Georgia afford food in the summertime.
In July, Kemp's office sent us this statement defending his skepticism of the program, citing concerns over the lack of nutritional requirements and a lack of fiscal sustainability.
That statement reads, while it is disappointing that the Biden administration would ignore reasonable concerns surrounding the program's lack of nutritional standards and fiscal sustainability, we will continue to promote the many successful programs.
And all we're asking is that you put our kids and our families first.
Georgia Democrats holding a virtual call tomorrow, trying to put more pressure on the governor. In Atlanta, I'm Abby Kasouris.
The letter sent to Governor Kemp, signed by 7 of Georgia's congressional delegation, reads this way. Governor Kemp, we write to you requesting more information about your decision to opt out of the U.S. Department of Agriculture's summer EBT program, also known as Sunbucks, and encourage you to commit Georgia to participating in summer of 2025 before the upcoming USDA deadline on August 15th, 2024. As of the writing of this letter, your office has yet to make clear whether the state will participate next year. As you know, summer EBT provides low-income families with school-age children a $40 benefit per eligible child per month, totaling a combined $120 for the summer when school is out of session. There are almost 1.2 million low-income children in Georgia who are automatically eligible for this benefit but cannot participate due to your decision to opt out of the program. The Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning claims that children did not have access to a Happy Helpings summer meal site in 59 of our 159 counties last year, and some counties continue to have no summer meal sites at all. Unfortunately, current summer meal programs are not sufficient, and the needs of families in Georgia are not being met. We hope that you consider submitting Georgia's interim plan for operations and management no later than August 15, 2024, and the appropriate notice of intent to participate no later than January 1st, 2025 to USDA for consideration and approval. While it will still be possible for Georgia to participate in summer EBT if these deadlines are missed, it is recommended that states submit all appropriate materials as soon as possible to ensure that the program is run smoothly. Sounds to me like there's a good opportunity to give some input on the nutritional aspects that the governor is claiming are an issue. You know what else is nutritionally bad for kids? Starving. Not having lunch, not having enough food in the pantry when mom and or dad are off to work. The letter continues. We share your commitment to ensuring that every child in Georgia has ready access to food throughout the year. Committing to participate in summer EBT in 2025 is a simple, common sense step that will ensure that every child in our state, regardless of where they live, has access to food when they need it most. States that refuse to participate in summer EBT for unsubstantiated reasons are needlessly putting children in jeopardy during the summer months. We look forward to a response to this letter as soon as possible. Thank you for your full and fair consideration in this matter. Again, signed by 7 of the congressional delegation. Lucy McBath, Nikema Williams, my congresswoman, Hank Johnson, Sanford Bishop, David Scott, Senator John Ossoff, Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock. This from the party, the GOP, Governor Kemp, this from the party that feigns concern about kids and exposure to drag queens. This from the party that is purportedly so pro-life. We're not even talking about state monies here. We're talking about federal monies that are available that do not impact the state budget in any way, shape, form, or fashion, and yet because the governor is given the thumbs up, thumb down option, he just chooses inexplicably the thumbs down option as opposed to participating and dealing with some of the complaints that he claims he has with the program. Sorry, but this is the kind of meanness just to be mean. The cruelty is the point plank of the GOP platform that I'll never understand. That'll do it for today's Ron Show. Show notes, everything you heard cited or used will be in those show notes at ronshowetl.com because that's my vow as a 29th year college dropout, pre-journalism major. See you tomorrow. Have a great one.